The air inside the grand chamber of Varelli's Prime hung thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Delegates from over 200 star systems sat in tiered arcs, their faces lit by the soft glow of translation orbs and data slates. At the center of it all stood Daniel Brooks, the lead human envoy. He was not a soldier, not a general, but a man who had spent his life trying to build bridges between species who barely understood each other. His dark suit was slightly rumpled from days of endless debate, and his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. Around him, alien dignitaries shifted in their seats, some curious, others impatient, a few openly dismissive. For weeks, the Galactic Council had argued over the Krell Dominion's sudden takeover of the Viridian Expanse. The region wasn't rich in weapons or warships, but it held something far more valuable: biosynthetic nodes, living crystals that could heal damaged ecosystems and purify poisoned worlds. Several smaller species, the Lumen, the Terran, the gentle plant-based mycelians, depended on those nodes for survival. The Krell, a militaristic reptilian race with gleaming black armor and cold, slit-pupiled eyes, had claimed the area under an old treaty loophole. They called it resource realignment. Everyone else knew it was conquest wrapped in legal paper. Daniel had pleaded with the council to condemn the move. Not with force, not with threats, just a statement. A simple, unified declaration that such actions violated the spirit of the Concord Accords. But the council, led by High Arbiter Zorvak, a towering four-armed being from the Veln Collective, had refused. The Krell have not broken any written law, Zorvak had intoned, his voice like grinding stone. To act on emotion invites chaos. The galaxy values stability over sentiment. That word, sentiment, had echoed in Daniel's mind ever since, as if caring for the weak was a flaw, as if standing up for those who couldn't fight back was childish. He looked out at the chamber now, at the rows of alien faces, many avoiding his gaze. Some had supported him quietly, in hushed corridors, but none had dared speak up in session. Fear of the Krell, or worse, indifference, had won the day. Back aboard the Earth Alliance cruiser Aurora Dawn, docked silently in orbit, Communications Officer Lena Ruiz watched the live feed from the council chamber on her main display. She sat in the dim glow of her station, fingers resting lightly on the console. At 28, she was one of the youngest senior officers on the ship, but her instincts were sharp. She'd grown up in the border colonies where promises from distant governments often meant nothing when raiders came calling. She understood what silence cost. Lena saw the moment Daniel made his decision. It wasn't in his words, it was in the way his shoulders straightened, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a fist on the podium. He simply stepped forward, placed his data slate on the speaker's stand, and said, "The Earth Alliance withdraws from these negotiations effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some delegates leaned forward in surprise. Others exchanged glances as if confirming they'd heard correctly. Zorvak's multiple eyes narrowed. "Envoy Brooks," he said slowly, "this is not a decision to be made in haste." "It's not haste," Daniel replied, his voice calm but firm. "It's clarity. We came here to build peace, not to watch it be carved up by the strong while the council looks away. If this body cannot defend its own principles, then our presence here is meaningless." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. No one followed. No one called out. Behind him, the chamber remained frozen, caught between shock and relief. On the Aurora Dawn, Lena exhaled. She tapped a command into her console, and the ship's internal comms crackled to life. "Command, this is Ruiz. Envoy Brooks is en route to the shuttle bay. Prepare for immediate departure." "Acknowledged," came the reply from the bridge. Minutes later, Daniel stepped aboard the shuttle, his face unreadable. He nodded at Lena, who stood by the hatch, arms crossed. "They didn't even try to stop me," he said quietly. "Because they knew you were right," she answered. "And that scares them more than the Krell ever could." The shuttle lifted off, leaving Varelli's Prime behind. Below, in the grand chamber, Zorvak finally spoke. "Let them go," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Humans are ruled by emotion. Their withdrawal changes nothing. The Krell will settle the expanse, order will be maintained, and the galaxy will continue as it should." But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. He had seen the look in Daniel's eyes, not anger, not pride, but resolve. And resolve, he knew, was far more dangerous than rage. Aboard the Aurora Dawn, Daniel stood at the observation deck, watching the blue-green swirl of Varelli's Prime shrink in the distance. He thought of the mycelian elder he'd met last week, her leaf-like skin trembling as she described how her people's homeworld was slowly dying without the bionodes. He thought of the Lumen children who would never see clean skies again. And he thought of Earth, not the politicians in Geneva, but the ordinary people who still believed in fairness and helping others, even when it cost them something. "We didn't fail today," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Lena joined him at the viewport. "No," she agreed. "We just stopped pretending." The ship turned toward Sol space, its engines humming softly. Behind them, the Galactic Council resumed its business, unaware that the quiet departure of one species would soon echo louder than any war fleet. For now, the humans were gone, but their absence, they would soon learn, spoke volumes. In the weeks after the humans left the Galactic Council, space grew quieter. Not peaceful, just empty. Trade lanes that once buzzed with Earth Alliance freighters now floated silent. Human cargo ships no longer docked at neutral ports. Their science vessels vanished from joint observation posts. Even their cultural exchange programs, once praised for their openness, shut down without explanation. To the rest of the galaxy, it seemed like humanity had simply closed its doors and walked away. But on Mars Colony Theta, things were anything but quiet. Deep inside the red planet's largest shipyard, engineer Nate Porter wiped grease from his brow and stared at the skeletal frame of a new vessel taking shape under harsh work lights. It wasn't a warship, at least not in the traditional sense. It had no heavy cannons, no plasma launchers. Instead, its hull bristled with sensor arrays, signal relays, and modular docking ports. Around him, workers moved with purpose, welding, testing, calibrating. Orders had come down from Earth Central Command. Shift all non-essential civilian production to dual-use systems. That meant every cargo hauler, every repair drone, every orbital station could now serve a second role: defense. Nate had spent 10 years building ships meant for exploration and trade. Now he was helping turn those same designs into something else. Not weapons, exactly. More like shields. He didn't like it, but he understood it. "We didn't start this," he muttered to his assistant, a young woman named Tessa, as they reviewed a schematic on a handheld screen. "But if they think we're just going to sit back while the strong take whatever they want, they don't know us at all." Back on Earth, cities hummed with a different kind of energy. News feeds no longer showed images of diplomats or galactic summits. Instead, they broadcast messages from scientists, teachers, and ordinary citizens explaining why the Viridian expanse mattered, not just to aliens, but to the idea of fairness itself. Children in schools wrote letters to the mycelians even though they'd never meet them. Factories that once made consumer goods began producing hardened comms units and emergency beacons. No one called it a war effort. They called it preparation. Meanwhile, far from Sol space, Mara Ellis remained on Varelli's Prime. She was the last official human presence in the entire sector, stationed there under observer status, a technicality that let her stay after the delegation left. She wasn't allowed to speak in council sessions anymore, but she could watch and listen. Every day she sat in the public gallery recording everything, sending encrypted summaries back to Earth. Most of what she heard was gossip, fear, or denial. Some species whispered that humans were overreacting. Others worried they'd gone too far. A few, like the gentle Lumen, sent her quiet messages of thanks. One evening, as she walked through the city's glass-domed promenade, her wristcom buzzed. It was a priority message from Earth Central Command. She found a quiet bench beneath a glowing tree imported from Proxima B and opened the file. There was no video, no voice, just text, stark and simple. "Stand by." The silence is the message. Mara read it 3 times. Then she smiled faintly. She finally understood. The humans weren't hiding. They weren't sulking. They were showing the galaxy what it looked like when a species stopped asking for permission to do what was right. Their silence wasn't weakness, it was a mirror. And the Council, she suspected, didn't like what it saw. Out near the Helios Rim, a quiet border zone between human and Krell space, things began to stir. The Krell, emboldened by the Council's inaction and humanity's withdrawal, sent scout ships deeper into contested territory. They probed old sensor buoys, tested response times, even hovered near abandoned research outposts. Each time they expected a warning hail, A patrol ship, maybe a show of force. But nothing came. No signals. No challenges. Just empty channels and dead comms. At first, the Krell commanders were pleased. They reported back to their high command. The humans have retreated. They lack the will to defend their interests. But as days turned to weeks, unease crept in. Why no resistance? Why no protest? In Krell culture, strength was shown through action, through dominance. Silence was either a trap or a sign of death, and they couldn't decide which scared them more. Aboard the Aurora Dawn, now stationed in high orbit around Luna, Lena Ruiz monitored the Krell movements from her console. She didn't alert command unless something changed. She just watched, logged, waited. She knew what was coming. Earth's strategy wasn't about fighting. It was about making the cost of aggression too high to bear. And that didn't require fleets. It required patience. On Mars, Nate finished installing the final relay node into the new ship's spine. He stepped back, arms crossed, and nodded. "She's ready," he said. Tessa gave him a thumbs up. The ship wouldn't fire a single shot. But if the Krell ever tried to jam human signals or cut off a colony, this vessel could reroute the entire network in seconds, using protocols no one else understood. It was built on open-source code the humans had shared freely for years, code the Krell themselves had adopted to save money. They never realized it came with hidden layers, ethical locks, and emergency overrides. Now those layers were waking up. Mara Ellis received another message. This one was longer. It outlined a series of quiet activations across human-controlled space. Satellites rebooting, old defense grids coming online, civilian ships updating their navigation software. None of it looked threatening. To an outsider, it seemed like routine maintenance. But Mara knew better. This was the calm before the storm they couldn't see coming. She sent a single reply. Understood. Standing by. That night she looked up at the stars from her small apartment window. Somewhere out there, Daniel Brooks was probably reviewing final plans. Lena was watching the Krell. Nate was testing systems. And billions of humans were living their lives, unaware that their quiet choices, their belief in doing the right thing even when no one was watching, had already changed the galaxy. The Krell would learn soon enough. The Council would learn even sooner, because humanity hadn't vanished. They had simply stopped explaining themselves. And in that silence, the truth grew louder every day. The attack on Helios 7 came without warning. It was a small science station orbiting a quiet star near the edge of human-influenced space, staffed by researchers from 6 species, including 3 humans. They studied stellar drift patterns and tested new atmospheric filters for terraforming. It was peaceful work, far from politics, far from war. But the Krell didn't care. To them, any human presence, even scientific, was a challenge to their growing control. A raiding fleet of 5 frigates dropped out of warp just after shift change. They fired no warning shots. They jammed all outgoing signals and boarded the station with brutal efficiency. Within an hour, Helios 7 was dark. 23 lives were lost. Among them were Dr. Eli Cho, a soft-spoken astrophysicist from Vancouver, and 2 young engineers from Nairobi and Buenos Aires. They had been calibrating a solar lens when the breach alarm sounded. They never made it to the escape pods. News of the attack spread slowly at first. The Krell claimed it was a misunderstanding, that they believed the station was a hidden military outpost. The Galactic Council called an emergency session within hours. Delegates argued, demanded evidence, called for restraint. But beneath the formal language, fear pulsed through the chamber. Everyone knew this was a test. The Krell were watching to see how the galaxy, and especially Earth, would respond. They expected outrage. They expected pleas for justice. They expected humanity to beg the Council for help, but Earth sent no envoy. No statement. No transmission of any kind. The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. On Varelli's Prime, Mara Ellis stood in her small apartment, staring at the blank screen of her comm unit. She had expected orders, instructions, maybe even a call to evacuate. But nothing came. Then, just as she was about to power down for the night, a single line of text appeared on her secure channel. Watch the Helios corridor. She didn't understand at first. Then she remembered the old defense grid, decommissioned years ago after budget cuts. Supposedly inactive. Supposedly harmless. She pulled up a public sensor feed from the corridor. At first, nothing. Then, one by one, Faint energy signatures blinked to life along the trade road. Not weapons, not shields, something else. Within minutes, every Krell ship within 3 light years reported sudden system failures. Navigation arrays froze. Comms dissolved into static. Even their internal lighting flickered. But no explosions. No hull breaches, just stillness. The Krell fleet that had attacked Helios 7 tried to retreat. Their engines wouldn't respond. Their weapons wouldn't power up. Their crew members collapsed, not from injury but from overwhelming neural feedback. A non-lethal pulse that scrambled short-term memory and motor control for exactly 47 minutes. Long enough to disable, not to kill. Back on Earth, in a quiet command center buried beneath the Rocky Mountains, Daniel Brooks watched the data stream with calm eyes. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. The neural scramblers had been built into old satellite frames, disguised as deep space weather monitors. The Krell had flown right through them, never suspecting that the very infrastructure they dismissed as human clutter was watching, waiting ready. On Mars, Nate Porter received a priority alert on his wristband. He read it once, then turned to Tessa. "It's live," he said simply. She nodded and began running diagnostics on the backup network. Every civilian freighter in the sector had just received a silent software update. If the Krell tried to hijack one, its cargo bay would seal, its engines would lock, and its AI would broadcast its location to every friendly ship within range. All of it ran on code the Krell had copied years ago to save credits on their own systems. They never realized the humans had left ethical tripwires in the Foundation. Aboard the Aurora Dawn, Lena Ruiz monitored the Krell fleet status in real time. Their ships were drifting, helpless but intact. Rescue teams from neutral species were already en route to recover them. No one was dead. Not this time. But the message was clear. Humanity would not strike first. But if struck, they would respond in ways no one expected. The Galactic Council reconvened, this time in chaos. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded Earth be punished for unauthorized defense actions. Others argued the Krell had brought it on themselves. High Arbiter Zorvac sat in stunned silence. He had dismissed human technology as primitive, their ethics as naive. Now he saw the truth. Humans didn't build weapons to destroy. They built systems to protect and to teach. Then a transmission arrived. Not from a war room. Not from a general. From Daniel Brooks himself. It played on every council screen, every public channel, every private comm unit across known space. His face was calm. His voice was steady. "We offered peace," he said. "You chose convenience. Now you'll learn the cost of both." The message ended. No music, no logo. Just silence. Mara Ellis watched the council chamber from her observer seat. She saw Zorvac's hands tremble slightly. She saw Krell delegates huddle together, whispering in fear. She saw species who had once mocked human idealism, now looking at each other with something new. Respect, maybe even shame. Later that night, she received another message from Earth. Just 2 words. Coming home. She packed her few belongings. She didn't look back as she boarded the shuttle to the Aurora Dawn, now waiting in high orbit. As the ship powered up, she saw the Krell fleet below, still disabled, still floating. But already repair drones from 3 neutral species were moving toward them, offering help. The galaxy was beginning to understand. Humanity hadn't abandoned peace. They had redefined it, and as the Aurora Dawn turned toward Sol space, its engines humming softly, Lena Ruiz sent one final signal. Not to the Council. Not to the Krell, but to every human outpost. Every ship, every colony. It was a simple code, 1 word long. Ready. Because the lesson wasn't over. It had just begun. The galaxy did not collapse after Helios 7. No war erupted. No fleets clashed in fiery ruin. But something deeper shifted, something quieter, harder to measure. The Galactic Council, once confident in its control, now moved like a ship with a broken rudder. Delegates who had laughed at human sentiment now spoke in hushed tones. The Krell, humiliated and stranded for nearly 2 days before their systems rebooted, refused to admit how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. They claimed sabotage, hacking, trickery, but their own engineers could find no virus, no weapon, no foreign code, only their own systems, built on human-designed protocols turning against them in perfect non-violent order. Back on Earth, life continued. Markets opened. Children went to school. Farmers tended fields under open skies. But beneath the surface, a new rhythm had taken hold. Civilian ships now carried encrypted failsafes in their navigation cores. Power grids across the colonies ran on layered security protocols that could isolate threats without blackouts. Even public data networks had silent watchdogs that could reroute traffic or lock down access if hostile patterns were detected. None of it looked like war. It looked like care, like preparation, like responsibility. Nate Porter stood on the observation deck of Mars Colony Theta, watching a freighter named Cedar Ridge undock. It carried medical supplies for a Lumen settlement recovering from drought. Hidden in its cargo manifest was a small relay node, standard issue now on every outbound vessel. If the Krell or anyone else tried to seize the ship, that node would activate, broadcasting its location and locking all internal systems until help arrived. Nate didn't tell the captain. He didn't need to. The system worked on its own, built into the ship's bones during routine maintenance. That was the genius of it. Defense wasn't separate from daily life anymore. It was part of it. On the Aurora Dawn, Lena Ruiz monitored a dozen sectors at once. She saw Krell patrols pull back from the Helios Rim. She saw neutral traders start rerouting through human-protected lanes, not because they were forced to, but because they felt safer. Word had spread. If you flew clean, if you meant no harm, human space welcomed you. But if you came with greed or violence in your heart, the very air around you might turn quiet, and that silence could stop you cold. Mara Ellis returned to Earth not as a diplomat, but as a witness. She gave no grand speeches. She simply met with engineers, teachers, city planners. She told them what she'd seen. The fear in the council chamber, the confusion among species who had never considered that ethics could be engineered, that peace could be coded. People listened, not because she was important, but because her words rang true. Humanity hadn't changed. The galaxy just finally saw them clearly. Then came the second test. 3 weeks after Helios 7, a Krell strike group, smaller this time, more cautious, tried to cut off a human supply convoy near the outer edge of the Proxima relay network. They didn't attack directly. Instead, they jammed comms and deployed drone mines along the route, hoping to force the convoy into a trap. It was a smart move, sneaky, precise, but the convoy never slowed. As the lead freighter, the Blue Haven, entered the jammed zone, its AI didn't panic. It switched to local mesh networking, using nearby sensor buoys, many of them disguised as space debris or old research pods, to map the minefield in real time. Then, using open-source navigation software the Krell themselves had installed on their own drones to save costs, the Blue Haven sent a silent command. Not a virus, just a standard update packet flagged as routine. The Krell drones accepted it without question. Within seconds, every mine powered down, their detonators locked, their guidance systems reset to factory defaults. The convoy sailed through untouched. The Krell commander stared at his screens in disbelief. He hadn't been outgunned. He'd been outthought by a cargo ship carrying fertilizer and water purifiers. News of the failed ambush spread faster than the first attack. This time, even council members who had doubted humanity before began to speak differently. "They don't fight," said a Veln delegate during a closed session. "They prevent." Another added, "Their strength isn't in weapons. It's in trust. They built systems others rely on, and those systems remember who they serve." High Arbiter Zorvak called a private meeting with his closest advisors. For the first time, he admitted fear, not of human aggression, but of human patience. "They gave us a choice," he said, his voice low. "We ignored it. Now they've shown us what happens when kindness has teeth." Meanwhile, on Earth, Daniel Brooks prepared for what came next. He wasn't celebrating. He knew the real work was just beginning. The Krell would not surrender easily, but they were starting to understand that bullying wouldn't work. Not here. Not anymore. Mara Ellis stood beside him in Geneva, looking out over Lake Leman. "They're asking for talks," she said. "Not through the council, directly to us." Daniel nodded. "Good, let them come." But not to negotiate terms, to learn. Back on Mars, Nate watched the Cedar Ridge disappear into the stars on his monitor. He thought of the Lumen children who would receive medicine because that ship made it through. He thought of Eli Cho gone too soon. And he thought of the quiet truth that no one in the galaxy had wanted to believe. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice built into the world so deeply that even the powerful can't ignore it. The Krell, humbled and wary, sent a message. Short, formal. They requested a meeting. Not on Varelli's Prime, not under council rules, but on neutral ground with only human representatives present. Earth's reply came within the hour. One word, accepted. And as the message traveled across the void, Lena Ruiz on the Aurora Dawn smiled faintly. She knew the galaxy was changing, not with fire, not with force, but with a simple, stubborn belief that doing the right thing, consistently, quietly, relentlessly, could reshape the stars themselves. The invitation came not with fanfare but with quiet urgency. The Galactic Council, once proud and distant, now asked humanity to return, not as petitioners but as partners. They offered a new seat at the table, equal to the oldest species. They called it a revised framework for mutual security. But everyone knew the truth. They were asking for help, not because humans had weapons, but because they had wisdom the galaxy had ignored for too long. Daniel Brooks accepted. He did not arrive in a warship or with a retinue of guards. He came aboard the Aurora Dawn, flanked not by generals but by scientists, engineers, teachers, and even a farmer from Iowa, who grew drought-resistant wheat for off-world colonies. They carried no demands, only blueprints, open-source designs for early warning networks, ethical AI governors, and shared sensor grids that could detect aggression before it happened. Everything was free to use. Everything came with one condition. It could not be weaponized or used to dominate others. If a species broke that rule, the systems would shut down for them alone. The code remembered. The signing ceremony took place on Varelli's Prime, in the same grand chamber where Daniel had walked out months before. This time the air was different, lighter, hopeful. Delegates stood as the human group entered. Even the Krell representatives, their scales dull with shame, bowed their heads slightly. They had learned the hard way that humanity's strength was not in destruction, but in creation, and in the quiet courage to stand by their values no matter the cost. Mara Ellis stood beside Daniel, not as an observer this time, but as a co-author of the new compact. She spoke briefly, her voice steady. "We didn't build these systems to control you," she said. "We built them so no one would have to suffer in silence again. Peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of fairness built into the tools we all share." No one argued. No one interrupted. For the first time in decades, the chamber listened. After the signing, the Krell envoy approached Daniel. He was older, his armor scarred from past battles. "We thought you weak," he said in rough but clear standard. "Because you spoke of care, not conquest." "We were wrong," Daniel nodded. "Strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how much you're willing to protect without losing yourself." The Krell envoy gave a slow, deep nod, their highest sign of respect, and walked away. On Mars, Nate Porter watched the ceremony live from the shipyard. Around him, workers paused their tasks to see Earth's moment. When it ended, Tessa turned to him, eyes bright. "What now?" she asked. "Now we keep building," he said. "Not just ships, trust." Back on the Aurora Dawn, Lena Ruiz sent a final transmission across the network. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't classified. It was a simple message, broadcast on all public channels. "Humanity is not withdrawing. We're recalibrating." The word spread fast. On colony worlds, in trade hubs, even in Krell outposts, beings read them and felt something shift inside. The galaxy had spent centuries believing power meant dominance. Humanity had shown another way, power as responsibility, as foresight, as quiet readiness. Later that night, Daniel stood alone on the observation deck of the Aurora Dawn, watching Varelli's Prime fade behind them. He thought of Eli Cho, of the Mycelians, of every life lost because the galaxy chose convenience over courage. He didn't feel victory. He felt duty. The work wasn't done. It never would be. But now others would walk it with them. Mara joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "They're already asking for the first training session," she said, handing him one. "The Lumen want to learn how to install the sensor nodes themselves." He smiled faintly. "Good. It only works if everyone owns it." In Geneva, Earth Central Command received a new request from the Veln Collective. They wanted to retrofit their entire civilian fleet with human-designed safety protocols. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Similar messages poured in from a dozen species. The old ways were crumbling, not from war, but from a better idea taking root. Nate, back in his workshop on Mars, opened a new file on his screen. It was a joint project with Lumen botanists and Krell engineers, designing a biosynthetic node that could heal both ecosystems and fractured trust. It would take years, but for the first time no one was rushing. They were building something meant to last. Lena, on the bridge of the Aurora Dawn, checked the star charts. Their next stop was the Viridian Expanse. Not to reclaim it, to help restore it. The Krell had already begun withdrawing, not by force, but by choice. They'd seen what happened when they crossed a line, and they didn't want to test another. As the ship sailed into the deep, its lights steady against the dark, the galaxy felt different. Not perfect, not safe, but possible. Because one species had refused to trade their soul for a seat at the table, and in doing so they had rebuilt the table itself. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of human space, a child looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're still here." And for the first time in a long time, the stars whispered back,